Welcome back. Sophie, one of the awesome sleep coaches here at Sleep and Wellness Coach, is back. I've asked her to come join me for another Before We Dive In combo here today because she is the mom of 3 girls, as you may have heard last week, and her youngest recently turned 4 months, and she ended up needing to transfer her out of the swaddle a little earlier than expected. And so she started to mention this to me the other day during one of our meetings, and I said, hold that thought. Let's come on and chat about it for the podcast, because I think there are a lot of parents of newborns who might appreciate hearing about your experience. So fill us in on needing to transition sweet little June out of the swaddle.
Yeah, so June was sleeping great finally. She was sleeping 12 hours overnight, and I think I texted or emailed you to tell you. And of course, as soon as that went into the universe, that day, she started to roll on her side, so show signs of rolling. And I was like, oh no, what have I done? But so that night, I didn't really have any issues with my first 2 daughters transitioning them out of the swaddle. I was nervous both times. And this time, because it had gone so smooth previously, I just didn't put a ton of effort into it. And I just unswaddled her that night. She had done a couple naps leading up to that without a swaddle, and it had gone fine. So I said, oh, not a big deal. But it was a big deal. She did not do well. So she went from sleeping, yeah, she went from sleeping 12 hours overnight to like 6 hours in, moving her arms around and then feeling different, I think. And she was whining and fussing throughout the rest of the night. And I was having to go in and even ended up feeding her in the middle of the night when we had previously dropped feedings. So yeah, it didn't go well at first. Then I ordered a transition swaddle, and while I was waiting for that to come in, she got her first cold. So then I was feeding her in the middle of the night, keeping her hydrated. And then after that, I think the 4-month sleep regression hit. So kind of like one thing after another. And she went from sleeping really great to not sleeping as good. But the swaddle took about a week and a half to come in. It was during the snowstorms this winter. And it was a game changer for us. However, she was already sleeping independently. Like she could fall asleep independently and back to sleep independently. So I don't think that a transition swaddle is going to, solve
Fix everything.
Yeah, it's not going to fix everything. But in June's case, once we put that on, I think just the restriction of movement slightly for her arms comforted her.
And did you use the Zippity D Zip? Sometimes I say it wrong, but is that the one you used? It's like a little starfish.
Exactly, yeah. Zippity Zip.
Yeah, Zippity Zip.
Yeah. And we ended up buying 2 of them. And yeah, but she went back to sleeping 12 hours overnight once she slept in with that.
Perfect. So within about a week, she was back.
Yep. So she went right back. So for other listeners who are going through this and they're stressing out and they think it's, they're never going to sleep again, rest assured, it may take a transition swaddle to help ease your child out of the swaddle. But as long as you've taught them the skills to fall asleep independently, they should be able to bounce right back.
And did she roll in that swaddle? And are you still using it?
So we did, yes. So she started rolling and sleeping on her belly some. I took her out of the swaddle, transition swaddle then. We had a couple more bumps in the road a few weeks later. I got sick and lost some supply. So that was another bump in the road. However, we're back to sleeping 12 hours overnight again.
Yeah.
And then I added back the transition swaddle, and she's mostly sleeping on her back now.
Okay, so what I love about this, and we had not chatted about this before we hopped on here, is that it's the perfect story of you are someone who obviously knows what you're doing. You know how to handle sleep. You had her sleeping through the night early, and then it still wasn't perfect. It wasn't a perfectly linear process. You had what I say is the perfect storm around 4 months where we could have sickness, along with the big developmental leap that happens there. You had to transition out of your swaddle. So you really had that perfect storm. And what I like about this is you didn't panic. It doesn't sound like you panicked. I'm sure you were not loving it, but you didn't panic. You stayed the course. You did what you needed to do while she was sick, while you were sick. And she got back on track. And one thing about the transition swaddle that you're mentioning that I think is worth mentioning for the listeners that aren't familiar with the zippity zip that I can never say correctly is one of the reasons I've recommended it for a long time now is because if they do roll while their hands are contained, they have enough ability to move that it's considered safe if they roll over, but it does kind of contain their hands so they're not smacking their faces as much and they're not disrupting their sleep. So I love that it helped you. And then typically I usually recommend once you get over that hump and they're comfortably sleeping on their tummy, while certainly there have been families that I've worked with who keep using that for months and months and months, but once they're on their tummy, you can typically transition to a more I would say traditional type sleep sack where their arms are free. It cuts off at the shoulder. So it sounds like that's kind of the path you took.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on here and sharing that. And I love that it wasn't a perfectly smooth ride and that you got to share it with all of the listeners. And I hope that some of you new parents out there found this helpful.
Thank you, Allison.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, Sophie. All right. Let's dive into today's episode. We're talking about teething and sleep training. Specifically, should you wait to sleep train if you suspect or know that your child is teething? If you have wondered about teething and sleep training, this episode is for you. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Teething and sleep is one of those topics that sparks a lot of debate. Anytime I share my thoughts on teething, I am quickly reminded that it is a very touchy subject. But today, I want to address a specific question I hear from parents all the time. Should you wait to sleep train if your baby is teething? My answer, no, you do not need to wait. In fact, I would argue that helping your baby or child learn to sleep well is one of the most effective ways to help your child avoid teething discomfort during the night. For years, I had my own theory about teething and sleep, but there wasn't any research to back it up. That's no longer the case. We now have new research confirming that teething doesn't actually cause night wakings. A brand new study published in the Journal of Pediatrics examined whether teething truly disrupts infant sleep. Researchers followed 849 infants aged 3 to 18 months and used auto video somnography, a fancy term for advanced video monitoring that objectively tracks sleep patterns, to confirm sleep on teething nights versus non-teething nights. The result? There was no significant difference in sleep quality between teething and non-teething nights. Even though more than half of parents in the study felt like teething disrupted their baby's sleep, the objective data simply didn't support that belief. In other words, teething might seem like the culprit, but something else is likely going on, like a baby who hasn't yet learned the skills to connect sleep cycles independently, a baby who isn't on their ideal sleep schedule, or an overtired child. This study reinforces what I've been saying for years. Teething is a normal part of development, and it doesn't need to derail sleep or prevent you from sleep training. And listen, I get it. When our babies or young children can't talk and tell us what's bothering them, it's easy to suspect that teething is the problem. But let me share a quick story that really affirmed my suspicions about teething and pain. When my daughter Ainsley was probably around the age of 3, I was brushing her teeth one night when suddenly her mouth filled with blood. There was blood all over the toothbrush, all intertwined with her saliva. I felt like it was everywhere. And of course, I panicked for a second and I had her spit so I could figure out what was actually going on in her mouth. It turned out she had a huge molar erupting through her gums. It looked really painful. The gums around it were clearly irritated and not happy about my brushing. So naturally, I asked, "Oh my gosh, Ainsley, does that hurt?" She looked at me totally puzzled and said, "No. What? Where is it?" I went back and tapped it with the back of the toothbrush, and she stuck her tongue back there and even put her finger in there and then said, "No, it just feels a little funny." And I had to laugh because it's such an important reminder that teething can look far worse to us than it actually feels to our kids. If a big molar breaking through the gums doesn't even register as pain to a 3-year-old who has the ability to communicate, how much discomfort do we really think a younger baby is feeling? Now, let's take a step back and think about teething logically. Teething happens on and off from around 4 to 6 months until 2.5 to 3 years old. It's almost a constant in that window. If teething truly caused major sleep disruptions, that would mean that most babies and toddlers wouldn't be sleeping well for years. But we know that that's not the case. Plenty of babies and toddlers sleep great, even while they're cutting new teeth. Now, I'm not saying teething never causes discomfort. Some babies do seem fussier at times, and parents might notice swollen gums or extra drooling. I know Ainsley definitely was fussy when she was teething, but I always compare the discomfort of teething to a bum sore knee. Not a majorly injured one, but a bum sore one, because this is something I can really relate to. I have one of those. If you wake up at night, you might notice that you have the sore knee, but it wasn't that bum knee that actually woke you up in the first place. You just felt uncomfortable after you woke up. So the best way to help your baby handle teething and all developmental changes is to help them build strong sleep habits and to sleep more soundly. A well-rested baby is far better equipped to manage discomfort than an overtired baby who is already struggling with fragmented sleep. And so if we can get them sleeping more soundly, they can avoid these wakings, the discomfort, and likely be more tolerant of the discomfort during the day. So if you've been waiting to sleep train because of teething, I hope this reassures you that you don't need to keep waiting. If your baby or toddler is otherwise healthy and you're ready to improve their sleep, go for it. Not only will you help them sleep better, but you'll also be setting them up for more restful nights in the months and years ahead, even as those teeth continue to keep coming in. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you don't already, please follow the podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss an episode. And if you have a moment, please rate and review the podcast. It is truly the best way to help more families find us. As always, thanks for listening. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.